Title: The Forest of Whispers. My name is Daniel Carter, and what I'm about to share still haunts me to this day. It was supposed to be just another camping trip, a chance to escape the city and reconnect with nature. But deep within the woods, I found something that I can't explain, and I doubt anyone would believe me even if I tried. It happened 3 years ago. My friends, Mark and Jenna, had convinced me to join them on a weekend hike through Black Hollow Forest. The place had a reputation for being unsettling, with old legends about people disappearing without a trace. But we laughed it off, attributing it to small-town folklore. We were seasoned hikers, after all, and eager for an adventure. The first day was uneventful. We trekked deep into the woods, set up camp near a small clearing, and spent the evening around the fire, sharing stories under a star-streaked sky. But as night crept in, so did an inexplicable tension. The forest felt too quiet, no rustling leaves, no distant animal calls, just an oppressive, unnatural silence. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. Around midnight, I woke up to a faint whisper outside my tent. The air had turned unnervingly cold, sending a chill through my sleeping bag that made my breath visible in faint, misty puffs. A heavy stillness pressed against the thin fabric of the tent, amplifying the soft, disembodied whisper that seemed to drift from everywhere and nowhere all at once. My skin prickled with goosebumps, an inexplicable sense of being watched creeping over me. It felt like unseen eyes were just beyond the thin barrier, waiting patiently in the darkness. My heart began to race, each beat thudding loudly in my ears as the whisper grew slightly louder, indistinct words merging with the oppressive silence of the forest. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the air was eerily still. The whisper grew louder, more distinct, though I couldn't make out the words. I peeked out, expecting to see Mark or Jenna. Instead, I saw nothing but darkness and the faint outlines of trees swaying slightly, though there was no breeze. I noticed faint shadow-like figures shifting between the trees, their movements unnatural, too fluid, like smoke caught in a slow current. The next morning, I asked if either of them had been outside. They hadn't. We laughed it off, assuming it was my imagination. But that day, as we hiked deeper, strange things started happening. We found trees with deep claw marks, far too large for any animal native to the area. My stomach twisted with an unease I couldn't shake, the jagged gouges carved so violently into the bark as if something had raked through with unrestrained fury. I ran my fingers over the grooves, feeling the rough, splintered edges, still fresh, as if whatever made them had passed through recently. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck, the air suddenly feeling heavier, harder to breathe. The forest seemed to lean in closer, the towering trees like silent witnesses to something unspeakable. A faint metallic scent lingered in the area, like sharpened for the first time. I felt a primal fear deep in my chest, the kind that whispered, "You are not alone." Odd symbols were carved into the bark, some fresh, as if etched just moments before we arrived. The forest felt like it was watching you send, not in the way you feel when you're alone in the woods. It was palpable, like unseen eyes bore into the back of my skull. By evening, we were all on edge. We decided to set up camp earlier than planned. As we sat around the fire, Jenna pointed out faint lights flickering between the trees, like distant lanterns. Mark joked it was probably other campers, but something felt wrong. The lights didn't move like flashlights or lanterns. They hovered, flickered, and then vanished. And occasionally, the lights seemed to form the faint outline of figures standing still, just beyond the fire's reach. That night, the whispers returned closer this time, clearer. They weren't random sounds. They were voices calling our names. Frozen with fear, we stayed inside our tents, too afraid to confront whatever was out there. The voices didn't sound human anymore. They had a strange, distorted echo, as if multiple voices were layered over each other, speaking in unison. At dawn, we discovered Mark was missing. His tent was empty, the zipper partially open. His footprints led into the woods, then stopped abruptly as if he'd vanished into thin air. Panic set in. Jenna and I searched for hours, calling his name, but the forest seemed to swallow our voices whole. Occasionally, we thought we heard his voice responding, faintly, but when we followed the sound, it always led us in circles. Eventually, We stumbled upon an old abandoned cabin, hidden deep among twisted trees. The door creaked open with a touch, revealing the inside covered in strange symbols, similar to the ones we'd seen carved into trees. In the center of the room was Mark's backpack, but no sign of him. On the walls, handprints, some small, some unnervingly large, were smeared in what looked like ash. There was a mirror in the corner, cracked and clouded, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw Mark's reflection. But when I turned around, the room was empty. We decided to leave immediately, but the forest didn't let us go easily. The path we'd taken had changed, twisted unnaturally. The trees seemed to shift when we weren't looking. The whispers grew louder, more aggressive, filled with anger and something darker. They clawed at our minds, not just with sound, but with an oppressive weight that settled deep within our chests. Jenna clutched her head, her eyes wide with terror, whispering that the voices were inside her thoughts, twisting memories, making her doubt what was real. I felt it too, a growing paranoia that made my heart race and my hands tremble. It was like the forest itself was reaching into our minds, planting seeds of fear that bloomed into vivid, horrifying images. Every shadow seemed to move with intent, every rustle a whisper meant only for us. Our thoughts no longer felt like our own, tangled with the echoes of voices that didn't belong. We started seeing shadowy figures following us, always just out of focus, disappearing the moment we turned to confront them. Jenna disappeared that night. One moment she was right beside me. The next, she was gone. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as I spun around, frantically searching the darkness. Her name escaped my lips in a desperate whisper, swallowed instantly by the dense, suffocating air of the forest. The only trace left behind was a faint indentation in the dirt where she'd stood, and a chilling coldness that seeped into my skin. Panic surged through me as I tore through the trees, calling her name over and over, my voice raw and trembling. But the forest remained indifferent, offering nothing but silence until I heard it. A faint echo of my own voice, calling back, distorted and wrong, coming from every direction at once. No sound, no struggle, just gone. In her place was a small bundle of twigs tied together with a piece of her scarf. I was alone, surrounded by voices that weren't mine, in a forest that seemed alive. I ran. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually, I stumbled out of the woods, collapsing on the side of a road. A passing driver found me and took me to the nearest town. I was dehydrated, disoriented, and alone. No trace of Mark or Jenna was ever found. But sometimes, when I stand near the edge of a forest, I swear I still hear them calling my name. And once, on a foggy morning, I found something lying just beyond the tree line, a small, weathered pendant that belonged to Jenna. It was tangled in a bundle of twigs, tied exactly the same way as the one I found the night she disappeared. The pendant was warm to the touch, pulsing faintly, as if it still held the echo of her heartbeat. I looked around, heart pounding, but the forest remained silent, until I heard a faint whisper. So close it felt like it was right next to my ear. "Come back." And every so often, when I catch my reflection in a window or mirror, I see something just behind me, fading before I can turn around.